Good evening. Welcome to Kennington Bioscope. I'm Glenn Mitchell and this is David Wyatt. And with us on piano for the first half, Meg Morley.
We're going to start with, I know what you're expecting, so we're going to start deliberately with someone else. We're starting with Buster Keaton, who is impersonating another film star, very briefly, and then you'll see the star himself.
Yes, well, as you no doubt have guessed, Buster Keaton was doing the famous pacey up and down of cartoon character Felix the Cat. And at our last show, we ran a couple of examples of an imitation done in Czechoslovakia in the 1920s. But tonight's first half is all about the real thing.
The reason we're doing Felix now is that it's his centenary, the centenary of the first Felix cartoon, which you'll see in a bit. I saw, probably like a lot of people, especially film collectors, I first saw Felix on 9.5 on a hand-turned toy projector. And they were also issued on 8mm and 16mm. And Glenn's first experience of Felix was in the world's worst kids' TV show.
Yes, it was. It had the terrible title of Zocco. It was shown when I was about 8 or 9 years old. Zocco was a kind of pinball machine robot who did the links. They dropped the idea pretty soon. It wasn't very good. But they used to play in different items like Ali Bongo, the Magician, and so on. But some of the things they played in were the 1920s Felix cartoons, and it was the first time I'd ever seen them. And within a couple of years or so, once I'd started to collect film properly, I started to find them on Standard 8 and then later on 9.5. I think the first one I found was Felix Follows the Swallows, which more recently has turned up on Talking Pictures TV, like everything else he used to do.
Felix was produced by Pat Sullivan, who was an Australian. This is the New York studio where they made Felix. Pat Sullivan is sitting front left, but as far as we know, he couldn't draw a thing, and he never did that job, sitting there drawing Felix. He was purely the producer, but took all the credit. And the man who really created Felix is sitting directly behind Pat Sullivan, Otto Messmer, who was the chief animator.
Yes, in fact, Sullivan pinched his desk for the photograph just to make it look good. Anyway, we're showing some of the complete cartoons, but for now we've assembled about 10 minutes of clips showing some of the ingenious gags that Messmer and his team came up with. You notice how many of these are about food?
Yes.
It's a preoccupation. They'd previously made a series of animated cartoons of using Charlie Chaplin's tramp character. We screened one of these courtesy of Bob Geoghegan at our World War I event last November. Now, unlike his many flesh and blood imitators, Chaplin actually approved of these cartoons and sent them photographs to use as models for his various poses and actions. And quite a lot of Chaplin's movements finished up being inherited by Felix. Now, here's a clip from one of these Chaplin cartoons that was made not long before the first Felix cartoon, and there's a clue as to what's to come.
Felix's creator, Otto Messmer, didn't really get any recognition until the 1970s, when he was discovered by several animators, including John Canemaker, who made a short documentary called Otto Messmer and Felix the Cat. Here's a bit with Otto Messmer talking about his approach and how the series came into being.
Some of the artists were looking more at the art form of the motion, you know, and I thought I would concentrate more on the gags. Well, the Sullivan studio was very busy, and Paramount needed, they were falling behind their schedule, and they needed one extra to fill in. And Sullivan, being very busy, said, if you want to do it on the side, you can do any little thing to satisfy them. So I figured a cat would be about the simplest. Make them all black, you know, you wouldn't need to worry about outlines. And little chasing a mouse around, but one gag after the other, you know, cute, and they all got laughs. So Paramount liked it, so they ordered a series, one at one. Well, in the first ones he was more angular, more like a dog, you know what I mean? But we found out, you know, there's a little difficulty when you start moving these angles. Rounding out was easier, you know, a ball, it was easier to turn, for instance, than a box or an angle, see? It's much smoother and easier to look at when it's round, you know? Mr. King of Paramount Magazine, we used to call it Feline Follies up to that point, and he figured it ought to have a name, so he suggested if we would care to give it the name of Felix, which we kicked around a little bit and decided this was it, meaning feline and felicity.
As Messmer said, the name Felix was suggested to them after they'd started, and indeed in the first one, at least, he has a different name. Just as Tom and Jerry started life as Jasper and Jinx, so Felix started out with a rather more commonplace cat name of Tom. Here's the very first one, Feline Follies from 1919.
So Felix then first appeared as just a short item in Paramount magazine every week, month, and then got proper distribution, and then they made complete cartoons for first Margaret Winkler, who later distributed for Disney, and then educational films, who were a big major comedy producer at the time.
Over here, they were seen as part of another magazine reel called Even Everybody's Film Review, which was aimed at women. And it seems like this was something designed to amuse the children that they'd have with them, a sort of early watch with mother. Unfortunately, Britain has always tended to see animation as kids' stuff, but these cartoons proved popular with audiences in general.
Felix was really the first cartoon character to spawn a merchandising boom. There was sheet music, there were records, there were toys, there were little porcelain ornaments, there was baby oil, even cigars.
Yes. Yes. And in 1929, NBC's experimental TV broadcast in New York devoted 2 hours a day of a Felix doll going round and round on a turntable. The lower left is the NBC studio in 1929 with the camera and the figurine, and you can see the low-resolution TV picture of Felix they got off him. I think that's all that survives of it. And the rest of it, well, say, this is the newspaper strip that was syndicated and the various toys and a magazine spread, of which more later.
The peak of Felix's popularity was about 1923, when he was as popular as Chaplin and Buster Keaton, would you believe? And coming up now is one of our favourite Felixes, where he impersonates Chaplin, and that's an in-joke, an Otto Messmer in-joke, because they'd made the Chaplin series before this. But you'll also see caricatures of other film stars and film personalities. Amongst them, Douglas Fairbanks Sr., William S. Hart, Cecil B. DeMille, Gloria Swanson, Ben Turpin, Will Hayes, who was the newly appointed film censor at the time, and we can't work out who one of them is. So, yeah. Kay Brownlow, if you can tell us afterwards who the cigar-chomping film director is, We'd all like to know.
Yes,
Or if anyone else knows.
yeah, if anybody knows, he's the only one we can't identify.
Any idea who that director was? Help.
No?
Oh, that's well got out of.
Yes,
Thanks,
quite.
Kevin.
That well-known generic director.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Pat Sullivan, by the end of the 20s, was drinking heavily, had a drinking problem, and exacerbated by the sudden death of his wife. And he wasn't really that interested to promote Felix anymore into sound. So he lost out to other cartoons, started to creep up and overtake Felix. So there was a brief revival by another studio, Van Buren, in colour and sound in the mid-30s, which didn't succeed terribly well. And nothing else until 1959, a batch of American TV cartoons where Felix had a Brooklyn accent. Yuck.
Yes. There have been occasional revivals since then. There was Felix the Cat, the movie, in 1988, but probably the best of them was a 1990s TV series called The Twisted Tales of Felix the Cat, which put Felix into a rather surreal world that was part Messmer's, but much more like that of the Fleischer Studio, as with Betty Boop and so on. So I think we need to get to the big moment.
I'm going.
I think I'll join it. Now, we mentioned earlier on that there were songs written and published about Felix the Cat. Now, the best known of these is from 1923, and it's called Felix Kept On Walking. Once again, with Meg Morley on piano, we'd like to welcome our vocalist film historian, Michel Facey.
Ding dong bell, pussy's in the well, meow. There's a funny little cat with a tummy nice and fat. He's won picture fame, and Felix is his name. Got a funny little walk, whiskers on his chin, and no matter where he goes or what occurs to him, Felix keeps on a walking still. With his hands behind him, you will always find him. Blew him up with dynamite, but him they couldn't kill. Miles up in the air he flew, he just murmured toodaloo, landed down in Timbuktu and kept on walking still. Felix kept on a walking still. By a train at Dover, had his tail run over. On the rail he left his tail, it gave the folks a thrill. Still for that he didn't care, though he had no rudder there. Whacked his nothing in the air and kept on walking still. Way out on a desert isle, Felix met a crocodile. It just gave a cough, blew his whiskers off. Then he walked for miles and miles till his feet were raw. Thought he'd have a rest, but then a lion there he saw. Felix kept on walking still. One day he was collared by a whale and swallowed. In the tummy of that whale he found himself, but still, all the same he never frowned. He just smiled and then looked round, thought it was the underground, and kept on walking still. Felix kept on walking still. Someone tried to drown him with a brick tied round him, shoved him in the rain tub there, but him they couldn't kill. Started lapping with his tongue till that water all was done. Then he crept out through the bung and kept on walking still. Kept on walking still. Meow.